Hi there. um, I want to talk about how wrong we are. It kind of gives me chills, you could say. Um, we're wrong about so much. Um, if anyone's interested in my situation personally, my health, I've put on a lot of weight. I went on a month-long fruit diet where I ate only fruit. Um, and I lost a lot of weight, and I felt very good. And I've never really felt better, you could say. And then I put it all back on, and some after, and even more. And this is all after a play that I was in recently, and I'm still questioning why I go after sweets as much as I do. But it's definitely a vice, definitely an addiction that I have, that I want to have. I definitely want to avoid my fear and my sadness. I don't want to feel my fear and sadness. I had some closer brush ups against some of my fear during the diet, and it was pretty remarkable. Um, it was a good lesson for me. Um, I had some significant teeth pain before the diet, and during the diet, much of it went away, not all of it. And then afterwards, I kind of went back on sweets pretty hard, and immediately I had the issues return, and I lost two teeth. So these are now lost. It looks terrible, I know. I have this one single tooth here. It's in decent shape, but it doesn't look good, of course. Um, Anyway, that's a update on my weight and my teeth. It's not the main thing that I want to say here in this video. I don't know if I'm going to fix these issues on Earth. I don't know. If I keep going the way I'm going, I probably won't last too long on the Earth. And that's nobody's problem but my own, by the way. I'm an adult and I can choose to deal with these issues or not. Nobody has to come to my rescue, so this isn't a cry for help by any means. These are my issues. So I just want to bring this up because I know some of the other videos I've made, I haven't wanted to show myself because of embarrassment. And that's also something that I choose to avoid. But anyway, the point of this video is to talk about waste and using too much, excessive use. I've been struck in the past. Some of the things AJ has talked about when he has talked about how horribly we're treating the environment. It makes sense that someone like him would be so concerned about something that so many people ignore. And we often say that we're concerned about the environment, and we often, try to recycle or do some things to ultimately pretend that we care. Recycling doesn't do very much. It's really the use of plastics and the excessive use of things, and not replacing the resource that we took away. So, you know, um, the excessive eating of meat, well, any eating of meat at all is wrong. Um, but also, consuming dairy, uh, those things lead to great environmental destruction, um, cutting down of many forests. And one thing that AJ has talked about recently is the chocolate industry. He spoke about it in a recent talk in Belgium. He and Mary are going on a world tour, talking about various things. But what one thing that hit me really hard is the use of plastic and the chocolate industry, and he mentioned even the use of tea is not a good thing. Um, and and coffee as well. Now, I'm not saying this and to point out specific things that are not good to use. You have to do your own self-reflection on what you consume and how you use things. So that's up to you. But he pointed out some interesting things about these industries, and especially the chocolate industry, which I followed up with and saw a documentary on the slave conditions of children in um, the Ivory Coast, and I forget the other one, but it's right next. I think it's Ghana, a country right next to the Ivory Coast. There's two countries, interestingly, from a region of Africa that where many slaves were captured and sold. So these two areas of Africa, there's a major chocolate trade, and I myself have used chocolate my whole life, so this definitely hits home for me. There's a huge chocolate trade, and not only are people treated terribly, and this goes for conditions of working people across the globe, the global south especially. We don't know how good we have it in the West, but not only are people treated terribly, but forests are wiped out to prioritize the cultivation of cocoa plants, and it's not sustainable. There's a lot of chemical that's used on the ground to make way for more chemical for more cocoa plants. And one thing AJ said, which struck me, which I have not been able to verify, but I wouldn't assume that he would lie on this, is that one, and if I misquote, it's my problem, but one chocolate bar takes like a whole cocoa tree and one person's effort in a day, one person's work in one day, a whole day of work for one person. And if you look at a cocoa fruit, like the whole fruit might be the size of my hand, it might be around this size, and very little of it becomes cocoa. So you have this gigantic fruit that nature is creating for us, and very little of it becomes cocoa, and that cocoa is put in our chocolate bars. And whether he's right on that figure specifically or not, it's kind of obvious that a lot goes into, the manufacture of one chocolate bar, and we demand that the price stays very low, and we don't think about what it costs, what it requires to bring that cocoa to, the shopping mall or the shopping mart. So I reflect on that, and I reflect also on plastic use and how ubiquitous the use of plastic is. You have soft plastic, like in shopping bags, and you have hard plastic, which can be found everywhere. If you get, I'm very acquainted with this, of course. You get a cookie, um, a container of cookies. A lot of times there will be a mold of harder plastic that the cookies are that shapes. There might be like 2 or 3 rows of cookies in that harder plastic mold, and surrounding that mold and the cookies in the mold is another plastic, sometimes like tin foil and plastic. I'm not sure what that coating of metal is, but sometimes you'll have plastic and wax paper or plastic and paper. I think in our cans, many cans are um, metal with plastic lining. Um, but you have harder plastics. A lot of times, I'm looking right now at some juice, a juice container, which is a harder plastic, and I'm on a table. I'm sitting at a table right now, which is made out of harder plastic, and some of the very hard plastics you might find in cars. So my car on the inside has a lot of harder plastics. I'm sure in the furnishings of the engine compartments and whatnot, you there are harder plastics that are used. So the use of plastic is ubiquitous, and softer plastics. I actually don't have the facts on this, but I've been told my whole life that plastic takes about 100 years to um, decompose in the earth. I'm pretty sure harder plastics take longer because they're harder, they're more dense. Um, Maybe they take hundreds of years. Maybe softer plastic takes even longer. And we, you know, bring these plastics to landfills and let them sit there and let them pile up higher and higher and higher. And we have to find new landfills to throw them at. And recycling doesn't solve these things, even if you recycled everything. But there's also like you don't get quite so much. It's not like it's a 1-to-1 ratio where you put in so much plastic and so much plastic comes out. Um, there's a degeneration in the cycle of plastic over time. You can't use plastic. You can't recycle old plastics, and you can't, you know, recycle plastic and then it becomes it has the same consistency that can be used in the same way again. So you can't necessarily make another plastic bag out of a recycled plastic bag. Um, I think most recycled materials are composites of more than went into it. But I don't have all the facts at my disposal with that. But it's surprising how much we take these things for granted, and it's surprising how ubiquitous all of these things are. At my workplace, I work at a pizza place. We have a lot of most of the food comes in plastic, like pretty much all of it, some kind of plastic, and a lot of the implements we use are have plastic. I'm thinking right now of a pizza cutter, which is a metal sheet, a hard metal sheet with a plastic handle, a hard plastic handle. So a lot of the implements we use are plastic. You know, most of the food comes in plastic, and a lot of the to-go containers that we give to people have plastic. But even the paper that we give, the non-reusable paper, that's a hazard to the environment. You know, I haven't figured out yet how to replace my toilet paper, but that's another harmful waste that I use, I consume, I utilize. Um, but yeah, our to-go cups and especially the utensils, that's hard plastic. That's a single-use plastic that um, you know is used quickly and then disposed of, can't be used again, and destroys the environment. Um, So I notice even in my job how, and this is just one pizza restaurant, but if you take into account all the fast food places, I notice how much waste there is, and how ubiquitous it is, especially in America. And we're basically we are incredibly wasteful. Our way of life is incredibly destructive to the environment, and ultimately we don't really care. And I'm not saying this to criticize people harshly or to put a bee in your bonnet, as they say, or um, I don't really. I see, at least to some degree, how anger doesn't assist in people's change. It can actually encourage them to. It can discourage them in positive change. It can encourage them to continue staying in their inertia of bad behavior. So I don't think becoming angry at people is the answer here, or being angry at myself is the answer here. But I think it's worthwhile to point it out. Um, I guess I'll say this right now. One of the biggest things that really hit me hard is the loss of aquifers and the watershed and aquifers. Even at 39, it's still something I'm trying to understand. I don't really understand too well, and that's another problem that I have. I should, I could understand this better, and why don't I? But there's a loss of aquifer, like basically the levels of aquifer water is going are going down. So aquifers, a rudimentary definition of that would be like a store of water underground, and it's where we get most of the water that we drink from and use for other things. Water use, that's a huge thing that I can go into. um, not only do we drink an excessive amount of water, not only do we use excessive amounts of plastic in our bottled water, but in creating much of our manufactured goods, the tools that we use, even in creating those tools, the tools that go into the manufacture of those goods, and the very manufacture of the goods. I don't know, shaving razors all the way to brooms, to just looking around my apartment. Think of something. There's a good chance that water use goes into it. And we shouldn't stop drinking water. Water is great. We shouldn't reduce how much we're drinking, but we should watch how much we're consuming and how much we are wasting. And also, we should make sure that we're replenishing all the water that we are taking out of these aquifers. Now, a lot of the reason why the aquifers are reducing their levels, which is a really devastating thing for the environment and for the possibility of us continuing to use those aquifers. A lot of the reason is because of environmental mismanagement and destruction of the topsoil, which is destroyed in our farming practices, especially cattle grazing, and a lot of chemical fertilizers we use in farming. This is something I still haven't researched enough, but even tilling of the soil can lead to topsoil destruction. So that's interesting. So even basic monocrop agriculture, where you have a single crop in like a square or a circle of land, a lot of times that land is tilled with a big tilling machine. It's all flat, and it's tilled. It's like turned over, and then there's fertilizer that goes on the soil to treat it, to prepare it for planting seed, and then crops grow and are ultimately harvested. um, so yeah, there's a lot of topsoil destruction, and there are better practices in farming that we could utilize. You could be more local. You could farm more locally. You can have your own little farm in your backyard. You know, how many people are, including myself, are restoring the environment of their property? I don't have a property. I'm at an apartment, but you know, the fact that I haven't manifested a property is a problem. The fact that I'm not, in environmental uh, recovery work more than I am is a problem. But how many of us are doing landscape work on our apartment, on our even in apartment complexes? You know, you could be in an apartment complex where you have somebody else doing the snow plowing and somebody else doing landscaping on the apartment complex grounds, um, and you basically have this monocrop of grass most of the time. Sometimes there's flowers, which isn't all that much better, but these are all cosmetically designed for our own visual benefit, and they're also treated with pesticides and all kinds of things, so we don't have to see or deal with insects or mosquitoes or things that we don't like. The wildlife are taken from residential areas that we are in. Um, we divorce ourselves from the natural environment, and we even in our own homes. It's not just the factories. You know, people love to blame business and big business or whatever, not taking into account what they're doing, to buy products from big business and not policing big business. And a lot of times people will become angry at big business, even though they're encouraging and supporting the work of big business by how they're consuming things. So that's a complete hypocrisy to get angry at people who you're you know whose work you are utilizing. That's a complete hypocrisy. But um, I guess I lost my train of thought there. I guess suffice it to say that not only our factories, yeah, I got it back, but our place of living. I go and I do property inspections on a lot of houses, and we will go to the farthest flung areas of the world and have live in remote areas and make these big ass houses in the mountains. I do a lot of inspections of properties in the mountains, and the amount of resources that are required to bring the heavy machinery to level the land and make a foundation and create this large house, and then the desecration of the local environment that we are a part of in doing that. And then we have our manufactured cosmetic landscapes with often just grass and whatnot, and we're encroaching further and further into the wild, which is the home to important ecosystems full of beautiful creatures that all have a job in the ecosystem. So we are effectively, with all of these things, what I'm saying is we're destroying the planet, and continuing in the way we're going, we won't have. I believe that God won't allow the destruction of the human race. I think things can get so bad, and people will be guided. I think if no one survives, which yeah, if hmm, if most people don't survive, I think ultimately a few people will survive on Earth. I think that's something that God will ensure occurs, but they will have very limited means, and we're basically creating that situation for them, you know, and that's probably why we have so many post-apocalyptic movies. We know what we're doing somewhere inside of ourselves. That's what's really funny, you know. We know what we're doing. We know how this is unsustainable. We know how um, you know how much devastation and destruction is being wrought by our own hands, by our own behaviors and attitude and practices. Somewhere inside we know, and that's why um, you know, God does not um, stop the law of compensation, you know, the law of karma, and he doesn't halt the law of, you know, that law. It's the same law to benefit our the ignorance that we have. Like we're ignorant, but we're deliberately ignorant ultimately. So so what I find in all this is, I guess my point here is that it's surprising to reconsider all of this and to see how much destruction that I'm a part of. I haven't fully, you know, obviously I haven't repented for all of this. I wouldn't be eating the way I'm eating. I wouldn't be living the way I'm living if I felt differently. But, you know, I would say it has struck a chord in me. It's really made me think about things. Um, and it's made me think how terrible a situation we are actually in. Um, and especially how ignorant we still choose to be. So when I was in college and I lost my religion, I went from believing in um, the Unification Church religion to complete atheism, to not believing in a God. I basically rejected there being a God. I had experiences with God growing up, and I just threw those out the window as I assumed they were just delusions that I had, which is what a lot of atheists and agnostics would call them. Um, and yeah, I became an atheist. And at that time, I looked into climate change. I needed something to occupy my time and I guess, my doom, um, you know, proclivities. My mother is a big doom person. You know, nowadays you'd call it a doom scroller, someone on the internet scrolling through the internet looking for more things that, you know, more evidence that doom is, you know, around the corner, that destruction and horrible things are around the corner. It's a weird addiction to have, I suppose, to almost want that, or to. I think it's partially about like reveling in revenge, because I think, you know, it's kind of like this way of saying finally some, you know, horrible thing will be exacted upon people who have treated me badly. So instead of feeling the pain that you may feel from someone treating you badly, or simply someone not giving into one of your addictions, which I'm sure that's what it is a lot of times. When you want to take, maybe it is all the time, anytime you want to take revenge, which is ultimately extremely angry, you know, all anger comes from an addiction not being met. So it might be all the time that anytime you want to take revenge or you become angry at someone, you know, it's because an addiction is not met. So for myself or my mother, you know, I'd have to consider that. But in those days, I would look into, you know, how horribly we're treating the environment, and I would look into climate change pretty heavily, and, you know, I was very aware of you know, how horribly we're treating the environment, and I kind of went away from that for a while, and I started believing that climate change isn't real in the way that we're we're believing that it is, but ultimately, AJ and Mary talked about how climate change really is, you know, a thing, and it makes sense that it's a thing. But I'm seeing it as a more rounded thing. Like everything that I mentioned in this video is causing the climate to change. It's not just because like carbon emissions isn't necessarily a bad thing because plants, basically absorb carbon in the atmosphere. So plants can utilize carbon, but the excessive rates at which in this industrial age we are emitting carbon into the atmosphere, that paired up with topsoil destruction and the reduction of aquifers underneath the soil, um, and pollutants to the atmosphere, and you know um, encroaching into the deeper wilds of the environment, and habitat loss and all of those things, all human activities are contributing to the climate changing. So it's not, I have a more varied and more a wider scope, um, looking at this climate change issue than I used to have. I thought it was just carbon at one time, and I thought, oh, we just need to change to non-fossil fuels, wind turbines, and water, and you know heat from the ground, heat and cooling from the ground. I forget what that's called, geothermal, um, or nuclear maybe too would be one solution, and then we'd be fine. But that's not how that works. So um, I guess what I'm saying here, what I'm surprised at is how ignorant we are of the issues that we're facing, and with that ignorance, there is like a great barrier to change. Um, I became vegetarian about 5 years ago, and I wanted to become a vegetarian about 15 years ago, even 30 years ago, or more. Um, I my sister decided to become a vegetarian. I don't know who became first, but also my uncle was a vegetarian. So I already knew that vegetarianism was a thing. People in my family were vegetarians. And so even then I was thinking about it. But everyone around me ate meat. I thought that was normal. I didn't like the look of meat. Um, Meat with enough salt and spices and everything else was decent in its taste, but if you ever have raw meat, it's not very tasty at all. So there's something to be said about that. Um, Fruit, on the other hand, is consistently tasty. you know, Even by itself. I had a mango, two mangoes yesterday morning, and it was one of the best meals I've ever had in my life, and I didn't add anything to it. So you know that just goes to show the genius of things created by nature, which is ultimately created by God. So, I was aware of vegetarianism even when I was a small child, but I really wanted to become a vegetarian when I was 15, and I looked into it for about 10 years before I decided to do it. And I thought that people were becoming aware of how terrible it is to eat meat and the suffering of animals, and I thought people were going to change. And to this day, I think the numbers on vegans and vegetarians have not changed very much. In the world, I think there's about 3% of the world that are vegetarian, and the number of vegans is still quite small. I think it's like 0.4% or so. It's quite small. And that those numbers in the last 15 years, I thought they would go up significantly. I thought, we'd get to a point where we'd have like 10% of the world being vegetarian. and we're nowhere close. In fact, we haven't budged very much. So that goes to show how much, inertia there is, how much resistance to change there is. And I guess what strikes me with looking into these topics more closely is how much resistance you have to kind of push against when you want to try to be more loving, and how normal it is to be unloving. Basically, it's extremely normal to be unloving to the environment, and we, like, at this point it looks like we are like catapulting ourselves towards the end of the planet as we know it. So we're not going there slowly and incrementally, but in a few generations we are destroying the planet. And like I said, I think, if we do destroy the planet, if it gets to the point where we can't breathe as well, we can't drink, we don't have the same access to water, we don't have the same access to food systems that support our ability to eat food. You know, I think some people will survive, but not many. And ultimately, we can recreate a better world, and maybe not destroy it the same way. Maybe we will, as the population, as we repopulate the planet. But still, we are creating this for the next generation. We're creating immense hardship. Like, I might die from all of this. Maybe it's not my own illness, but maybe it's my own hubris and ignorance that will kill me, because I'm destroying the planet, and I will, die in the destruction that I brought. But sorry, I lost my train of thought again. um, but yeah, like the collapse is fast approaching. If it doesn't happen, I think AJ projected that in the next 30 years things will become really difficult. Now he and his team in Australia, spend a lot of time, and he's been working on the environment for a long time. He started his life eating a lot of meat. He was a big carnivore until one day he made some changes in his soul, and he relates an experience of trying to eat one of his favorite dishes at a restaurant, and throwing up immediately there afterwards. And this is all after making certain changes in his soul. So his physical body, like for myself, like I eat a lot of sweets and I can handle it. I have pre-diabetic symptoms, and I have a lot of pain in my body, but I know some people couldn't handle the amount of sugar intake that I handle, and for whatever reason I can handle it. But maybe if I made some changes in my soul, I wouldn't be able to handle it the same way. But he would eat meat his whole life, and then finally, after making some changes, he couldn't anymore. His body literally couldn't handle it, and he threw up once, and then he tried to eat something else, another, maybe fish or something, and he threw up again. So he he realized from that eating meat, he just couldn't eat meat. So um so that was an interesting change, but he is repentant. I think he repented of that, and he talks about how when you truly repent for errors that you commit, you will change. And not only that, but you will spend the rest of your life trying to ensure that change happens. I'm getting emotional thinking about that, because it's such a beautiful idea that I hope that I can have at some point. The idea that I hate the idea of environmental recovery. I kind of like it. I like thinking about it. I like hearing AJ and his team and Mary, working on the environment in Australia. I love hearing about it, but I don't want to engage in that work myself. I've done a few things on my property, but in total, probably 2.5 hours in the month I've been here on this new property. But meanwhile, AJ has been doing like hours of work daily, pretty much, since he made that change and since he got this new property that he's on, which he's had probably 20 plus years or so. And and he'll work for hours in a day, you know, on on environmental recovery. And now he and Mary assist a team to do environmental recovery. And for a long time, I think they finally reached the milestone where they could where they were mostly pretty much done with this work. But for a long time, they were just weeding a particular plant called the Mother of Millions. And if you're following the work of AJ and Mary at all, then you know about that. But I'm so glad to hear more about that because there was a time where I'm like, this is what they're doing. You know, why don't they just let the plant do its work and grow and let the ecosystem handle itself? Why don't you just like support the ecosystem to naturally kill off this weed in its good time? It's basically an invasive species. But no, they decided to put their hands on the dirt and weed every single Mother of Millions on their 40-acre property. Maybe even on other properties. I don't know what other properties I've heard of other properties that they're now managing, but it's taken years. I don't know how many years, maybe two, maybe a year and a half at the least, but it's taken a long time to work on that one plant. Just weeding that one plant. Many hands just weeding that one plant. People coming and visiting and weeding that one plant over and over and over again for hours in a day. I'm like, I would never have the patience to do that. So not only am I talking about like how ignorant we are of, the harm we're causing the environment, but very few of us would eagerly, and not a lot of these people are eager to do the work they're doing, but they're happy to be in the company of AJ and Mary. But you know, I have to be dragged kicking and screaming to do that kind of freaking work. And, but AJ has said that if everybody on the planet does 2 or 3 hours of weeding in a day, or not weeding, but just environmental recovery work in a day, if you educate yourself and you become repentant and you become, that's the quality of repentance, is to now want to change. And that's how I know in many ways I haven't repented for many things, but I'm still in heavy resistance. But the quality of repentance is to actually want to be a part of things changing. So all the things that you have, all the errors and sin that you've committed on the earth, and all the destruction and harm that you've caused on the earth, and all the times that you've influenced others just by your very actions, to think that it's okay to do those things, even if you don't deliberately say, "Hey, this is a good thing to do." Um, you, after repenting, eagerly want to assist in the change. So not only will you stop those harmful behaviors and actions, but you will go about teaching other people and actually doing physical work to change. So instead of, if you want to be a vegetarian, you know, if you repent for eating animals, which, interestingly, now that I think about it, even though I'm a vegetarian, I haven't repented. I don't think. Yeah, I don't think I have. But instead of eating meat, like, not only do you stop eating meat, but you go about um, checking the destruction um, of the earth, and you start engaging in environmental recovery. So every morsel of meat, all the meat that you've eaten, has caused, not necessarily in your community, but in communities probably not so far away. A lot of times meat is more local. But like chocolate, when I eat chocolate, I'm destroying the country of the Ivory Coast and Ghana. But when I eat meat, I'm destroying local communities, local areas. When I drink milk or eat dairy products, I'm destroying local communities. um, you would if you were repentant, you would um, eagerly engage in the restoration of the environment. And AJ has said, like you wouldn't be resistant to it, you wouldn't be lackluster about it, you would eagerly try to have the opposite effect and continuing a positive effect on the environment. So even if you have paid for everything in God's eyes or somebody's eyes, and it's hard to pay for all of your sin because you don't know the extent of your sin, because one little sin has so many reverberations. It's like, dropping the proverbial pebble in a lake. It has a ripple effect across the world. So you can't even account for all the effects of your one sin. But even if you were somehow to compensate for all of your sin, to pay for all of your sin, you still want to, even above and beyond, you want to support in the change, in the positive change in the earth. And that's mind blowing, to me, to think that I could actually reach a point where I can repent and I can now want to change the world for the better, instead of right now I feel like you have to, drag me kicking and screaming to do any kind of recovery work. So that's a meaningful thing to shoot for. But AJ has said that if everybody on the earth spent 2 or 3 hours a day working in environmental recovery, we could have the earth restored to full health in a year. And that blows my mind. That really is amazing. And I don't know that we can do that. I don't know if we can get to a point where even everyone does 1 hour of work. A lot of people, they want to pay money to somebody else. They want to make a lot of money, and they want to pay another person to do the work. And that's how they, deal with their guilty conscience. That's probably not the appropriate use of the word, now that I know better what the conscience is. But anyway, I think I sound like a divine truth nerd a lot of times, but, I don't really mind that moniker. Um, but yeah, I don't know that that everybody can change. Like I said, we are catapulting ourselves. We are doing an Olympic marathon race, to our ultimate destruction, and we are sinning greatly and causing the next generation incredible harm. So we're not making things better at all. And and when I see the ticker on, vegetarian changing so little, vegetarianism and veganism changing so little, and when I see, you know, now rethinking about our plastic use, I am just like, yeah, I don't see how we can change. I I care less and less about helping people and more about changing myself. Like, I feel like I have to invest all of my work in myself, all of my attention, all of everything in myself, and producing even a little bit of change. Like, I'm so resistant to change, and like one day I have a goal to eliminate my use of dairy and sugar altogether. And I don't know if I'm gonna achieve that. Sugar has been a harder addiction to stop than meat, for sure, for me. It's something I depend on even more. But it's something that I want to change eventually. But that's just a small change, and it's like a physical change. It's a physical addiction, which behind it there are emotions that I have to change. And those are arguably bigger. Emotional addictions are arguably even bigger. So, yes, I can stop eating meat. Yes, I can stop, consuming sugar. Yes, I can stop consuming dairy. But there's thousands and thousands of other things that are maybe even more important that I need to change. And like when you consider the amount of work you have to do and the dedication you have to just change yourself, like I now see how big a deal it is to change yourself. I mean, and I see so much resistance to change. Like if I were to talk about these things to people who are not interested, people who are not acquainted with the divine truth, like they would just scratch their heads. They'd be like, what are you talking about? Even though they're ultimately just in denial, even though in themselves, somewhere deep inside, I would strike a chord. In their facade, they'd probably be like, what is he talking about? And they'd push it aside. But everybody knows, like I said, that they're just destroying the environment. Someone myself, I put it off for years, ever since I was in college as an atheist. I decided that, and you know why I decided this? But I'll tell you what I decided. I decided that um, climate change wasn't that big of a deal. And it's only because AJ and Mary have talked about how big of a deal it is that I've reconsidered. So that goes to show how much, just one person who you trust and admire saying something can change your mind about it. But it was several years ago, and I'd been on the fence for years, but some TV broadcaster on some conservative pundit said, "Don't plants need carbon to live? Don't they feed off of carbon? So why are we so worried about carbon?" Sorry for my southern hick voice. I don't want to insult people from the South. I love that voice, and just because you have that accent doesn't mean you're dumb. But that one thing, kind of that one statement, made me reconsider and made me think, oh, climate change isn't that big a deal. Yeah, he's right. That is right. So, yeah, I don't need to worry about climate change. And so for years I put it off, just going off of that one thing that guy said, and now I'm reconsidering it again more seriously. But it's crazy how we can do these mental gymnastics to get away from these important things, and yeah, we're all in extreme heavy denial and in a big facade about the destruction we're doing to the planet. And like I said, like it's so ubiquitous, the way we use plastic, the way we turn our eyes away from the reduction of, like, just, I think one of the biggest things was that I heard recently, even more than the chocolate, the more devastating thing was the water, the aquifers and the water. I can't imagine not having delicious drinking water. I don't know how to get good water, and I don't care at this point to investigate on it too much, but I really ought to. Right now, I get water out of a plastic bottle. I love spring water. I don't like tap water. I haven't had a tap water that I've really liked ever. And so I do use bottled water. And AJ, in a recent talk in America, in Texas, about 10 years ago, maybe not so recent, but he talked about how important it is to look at the source of not only our water, but our how we're managing our own waste, urine and feces, um, you know the structure we live in, our house, and all these physical things that we need to live, that are good to live, that are important, or it's important that we have these things to live. You know how what the sourcing of all of those things are. And so maybe at some point I need to, you know, reconfigure how I get my water and make sure it's more local. Because right now I'm using a lot of plastic, and this water is being transported all the way from Arkansas to New Mexico for my consumption, and it's probably extremely unloving, you know. Um, but yeah, especially for Americans, it's important to look at how we source the things that we need to survive, to live. And yeah. So I guess the whole point of all this, and let me close here and say that we are very ignorant and we're very resistant, especially people in the West, of the harm that we're doing. Like I wish I could find a more strong word to say this, but we're like boldly, savagely, like catapulting ourselves towards environmental destruction. We're boldly and savagely ignoring the effect we are having on the environment. we're boldly and savagely consuming, over consuming, not even just in a light excess. We are overly consuming to the detriment of the rest of the earth. And basically, we all the poverty that we see in the third world or the global south, whatever you want to call it, that is in large part the result of Western hands, primarily. So me and you, probably if you have the resources to watch this video. So um, like I don't know how to make a stronger statement than that. Like we're boldly resistant. We know we're causing the problem, and we boldly ignore it. So it goes to show how terrible a state we are in currently, and how monumental an effort we have to make to change it, each of ourselves individually. And I know that myself, with my words and my attitude at this point in this video, is probably not going to change hearts and minds very much, because I haven't made much of a personal change in my own life. And when I think about my teeth health, and my bald head and my overweightness, my excess skin and fat all over my body, and back problems and other physical problems, and how I want to change all of these things, and when I think about not just my plastic use, not just my water use, not just the consumption of dairy and sugar, but everything that I do, you know, to to assist the destruction of the environment, it's overwhelming. And I've considered more like the position God plays in my life, because I can't, I don't know how else to do this. I don't know how else to, sorry, I don't want to have this like, you know, I don't want to get emotional here, because that's like, I feel like that's kind of tacky, but if I allowed myself, I would get emotional. But yeah, God's role in my life, God's position in my life is so huge, because I have no idea how to, I have no idea how to solve these things myself. And um, I feel like if I took every issue that I had in my life, all the sin that I'm causing, and I wrote it down in a list, it would probably be, if I had one line for every major thing, it would probably be 20 pages long, at least, you know? And if I were to go about, devoting time in each and every day to one or two of those things, all my time would be taken. It took me 10 years to become a vegetarian. And all I can say is that I hope that changing yourself emotionally really does solve these problems, because I don't know how I can do this by myself. It's too much. It's so much. So I'm gonna close this video out so I can maybe cry or something. But um, I hope that God is the answer, because I don't think I like I would ask for. I need a couple hundred years at least. Maybe I conservative. Liberally speaking, I guess 1,000 years to make some major changes in my life, if I go the way that I'm going. Maybe with God's help, I can go on a faster track towards changing myself and helping to change the earth. But right now, I don't know how I can do this by myself. So I'm hoping that God really is the solution. And if I spend more time asking for God's love and truth, and I'm more humble to my emotions, then yeah, maybe that really is the change that I need to do. Or that is the way to solve all these things, all the ways in which I harm uh, my friends and family and the earth that God created for me. So, I guess that's it. And this is interestingly ending at exactly an hour. So, there it is. I hope this meant something to you. Maybe you'll see some changes in my life over time, and maybe you won't. I don't know at this point. Maybe you can be the change that you want to see in the world.